Mom, you're obviously losing your mind. Derek and I think it's time you moved into assisted living. My daughter Cassandra stood in my kitchen, holding a manila envelope thick with legal papers. Behind her, my son in law Derek was already measuring my dining room with his phone. We found a lovely facility, she continued. Not meeting my eyes? You can visit the vineyard on weekends. Derek's real estate contact says we can get $4 million for the property if we move fast. I looked at this woman I'd given birth to 35 years ago, this stranger wearing my daughter's face, and I said the words that would change everything. Get out of my house, both of you, right now. That's when Derek smiled, actually smiled, and pulled out his own envelope. Actually, Helen, we figured you'd react this way. That's why we brought these papers from the courthouse. You're being declared mentally incompetent. The guardianship hearing is next Friday. My name is Helen Patterson, and I'm 64 years old. 3 years ago, I buried my husband, Robert, after 41 years of marriage. We built Patterson Vineyards from nothing, started with 12 acres of rocky soil and a dream back in 1982. I was 23 when we planted our first vines, 25 when I worked the harvest 8 months pregnant with Cassandra, my back aching as I bent over grape clusters in the September heat. Robert would find me at dawn, still checking the fermentation tanks because we couldn't afford to hire help. Every dollar we made went back into the land. We expanded to 60 acres over the decades, won state awards for our Pinot Noir, built the tasting room with our own hands. I put Cassandra through law school, $42,000 a year, because she insisted on the prestigious private university. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to cover her final semester. She met Derek during her last year. Charming, ambitious Derek with his MBA and his talk about maximizing asset potential. At their wedding, he pulled me aside and said, Helen, you and Robert built something incredible here. With the right development strategy, this land could be worth 10 times what it is now. I remember thinking it was an odd thing to say at a wedding toast, but I brushed it off as enthusiasm. After Robert died, Cassandra started visiting more often. At first, I was grateful. The grief was suffocating, and the vineyard felt too big, too quiet without Robert's laughter echoing through the cellar. But her visits weren't about comfort. She'd walk through the property with Derek, both of them taking notes, discussing structural improvements and market positioning. Derek would ask pointed questions about our insurance policies, our debts, our profit margins from the past 5 years. Mom, have you thought about what happens to this place when you're gone? Cassandra asked one evening as we sat on the porch overlooking the vineyards. The sunset painted the grape leaves gold, the same view Robert and I had shared for decades. I mean, maintaining 60 acres at your age? The physical demands alone. She let the sentence hang in the air like smoke. I told her I wasn't planning on going anywhere anytime soon. I was 64, not 94. I ran 3 miles every morning, managed our seasonal workers, handled the books, coordinated with distributors. But Cassandra had planted a seed of doubt, and she watered it every visit. That's when I realized something was wrong. Derek started showing up without Cassandra, claiming he was just checking on me. He'd find excuses to wander through the house, always ending up in Robert's study where we kept our important papers. One afternoon, I came back early from town and found him photographing documents in Robert's filing cabinet. When I asked what he was doing, he claimed he was helping organize things for Cassandra's peace of mind. The gaslighting started subtly. Cassandra would reference conversations we'd supposedly had about selling the vineyard. "Remember when you said you were tired of the harvest stress?" she'd say. "When you mentioned wanting to downsize?" I never said those things. But she'd insist I had, that I was forgetting more and more these days. Derek would nod along, adding his own fictional memories of things I'd supposedly told him. They began treating me like I was fragile, incompetent. When I mentioned updating our wine club's mailing list, Derek would exchange glances with Cassandra and say, "Maybe that's something we should handle for you, Helen." Marketing can be overwhelming. When I talked about hiring new seasonal workers for the upcoming harvest, Cassandra would pat my hand and suggest I was taking on too much responsibility. The manipulation escalated when they discovered I'd been meeting with potential buyers for our wine, not to sell the vineyard, but to expand our distribution. Derek accused me of making major business decisions without family consultation. But what I discovered next left me speechless. I hired a private investigator, something Robert always said we should do if we ever suspected employee theft. I wanted to know exactly what Derek and Cassandra were planning. The investigator, a former police detective named Patricia, uncovered Derek's meetings with land developers. He'd been shopping our property around for months, getting preliminary offers, discussing subdivision possibilities. The vineyard that Robert and I built with our sweat and dreams was being carved up on paper in conference rooms I'd never seen. Patricia showed me photographs of Derek meeting with city planning officials, discussing rezoning applications. He'd forged my signature on preliminary documents, claiming I was interested in exploring development options. When I saw those forged signatures, my hands shook with rage. This man had been in my home, eaten at my table, called me Mom for 12 years, and he was systematically stealing my life's work. The baby shower invitation, or rather, the lack of one, was the final insult. Cassandra was 6 months pregnant with their first child, my first grandchild. I'd been planning to throw her the most beautiful celebration, had already ordered flowers, booked the country club, invited her college friends. Then I received a letter in the mail. "Mom, Derek, and I have decided to keep the baby shower small and intimate. We can't have any stress around the baby, and frankly, your recent behavior has been concerning. We think it's best if you don't attend." Your recent behavior, as if defending my own property from thieves was unreasonable behavior, as if refusing to be gaslit and manipulated made me the problem. I sat in my kitchen, reading that letter over and over, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I'd made for this ungrateful woman who was now carrying my grandchild while plotting to destroy everything her father and I built. I wrote back exactly what I said I would. Understood. 2 words. Nothing more. Because I understood perfectly. I understood that my daughter had chosen greed over love. I understood that Derek had poisoned her against me. And I understood that I needed to fight back with everything I had. That's when I realized I wasn't as helpless as they thought I was. Robert hadn't just taught me about growing grapes. He'd taught me about protecting what we built. Before he died, we'd established an irrevocable trust for the vineyard, something Derek and Cassandra didn't know about. The land couldn't be sold without the approval of 3 trustees: myself, our longtime family attorney, and Robert's best friend, a retired judge. I called our attorney, Benjamin Walsh, who'd handled our business for 25 years. When I explained what was happening, his voice turned cold. "Helen, what they're attempting is elder abuse and fraud. We need to document everything." He helped me understand the guardianship papers Derek had filed. They claimed I was suffering from dementia, that I'd been making erratic financial decisions, that I was no longer capable of self care. The supporting evidence they'd fabricated was elaborate. Derek had apparently been keeping a journal of my concerning behaviors, times I'd supposedly forgotten appointments I never made, conversations about selling the vineyard that never happened, incidents of me being confused about basic daily tasks. Cassandra had provided an affidavit claiming I'd called her multiple times, not remembering previous conversations, that I'd accused workers of stealing things that were never missing. Benjamin reviewed their documents with the sharp eye of someone who'd spent decades spotting lies in legal paperwork. Helen, this is sophisticated fraud. They've been building this case for months, maybe longer. But they made one crucial mistake. He pointed to a date on Derek's journal entry. He claims you forgot about a doctor's appointment on March 15th and called him confused. But I have your medical records right here. You were never scheduled for any appointment that day. In fact, you were in my office signing contracts for the new wine distribution deal. We spent the next week preparing for the guardianship hearing. Benjamin subpoenaed my medical records, bank statements, business correspondence, everything that would prove my mental competence. My doctor was appalled when he learned about the guardianship petition. Helen is one of my sharpest patients, he told Benjamin. She manages complex medication schedules for her seasonal allergies, handles detailed business correspondence, demonstrates excellent memory and judgment. There's absolutely no evidence of cognitive decline. The private investigator Patricia continued documenting Derek's activities. She discovered he'd already received preliminary approval for a construction loan, assuming he'd gained control of my assets through the guardianship. He'd been planning to subdivide the vineyard into luxury home lots, estimating a profit of over $8 million after development costs. But what I discovered next left me speechless. Patricia had recorded Derek talking to his real estate partner, bragging about how easy it had been to manipulate the old woman. He laughed about my sentimental attachment to the vineyard, called me pathetically naive for trusting them. Worst of all, he joked about how Cassandra had finally grown a spine and chosen money over her crazy mother. The night before the hearing, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by 40 years of memories. Wedding photos, pictures of baby Cassandra in the vineyards, harvest celebration snapshots, award certificates from wine competitions. Had I failed as a mother? Had I spoiled Cassandra so much that she couldn't distinguish between love and money? Robert would have known what to say, how to fix this, but Robert was gone, and I had to fight this battle alone. The courthouse smelled like old wood and fear. I arrived wearing my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to receive our vineyard's first major award. Cassandra and Derek sat with their lawyer at the plaintiff's table, both of them avoiding eye contact. Derek wore an expensive suit I'd never seen before, probably bought with money he was already counting from the vineyard sale. Their lawyer presented their case with theatrical concern. I was a vulnerable elderly woman suffering from increasing cognitive impairment. They had reluctantly concluded that I needed professional care for my own safety. Derek took the stand and delivered his performance with practiced emotion, describing incidents of my confusion and poor judgment with the skill of someone who'd rehearsed every word. Cassandra's testimony was harder to watch. She spoke about her deep love and concern for me, how difficult it was to accept that I was declining. She claimed I'd called her at 3 in the morning, not remembering previous conversations. She described finding me wandering the vineyard in my nightgown, confused about where I was. Every word was a lie, but she delivered them with tears in her eyes. When Benjamin stood up for my defense, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was 73 years old, with silver hair and the commanding presence of someone who'd spent 50 years destroying lies in courtrooms. He began with my medical records, my doctor's testimony via video conference, my recent business correspondence with distributors and suppliers. Then he played Patricia's recordings. Derek's voice filled the courtroom, bragging about manipulating me, laughing about my sentimental attachment to the vineyard, discussing subdivision plans with developers. The mask dropped from Derek's face as his own words condemned him. Cassandra stared at her husband in horror, probably hearing for the first time how he really talked about her mother. Benjamin presented the forged documents, the unauthorized meetings with developers, the preliminary construction loan approval Derek had obtained using falsified information about his future control of my assets. He showed the court Derek's detailed timeline for selling the vineyard, complete with profit projections and marketing strategies. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, reviewed the evidence with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to uncovering truth from lies. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of the law. This court finds no evidence of mental incompetence on the part of Helen Patterson. Furthermore, this court finds substantial evidence of attempted fraud and elder abuse on the part of the petitioners. Derek's face turned white as the judge continued. Mr. Derek Mitchell, you are hereby ordered to cease all contact with Mrs. Patterson's property and business. This court is referring your actions to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution. Mrs. Patterson, your assets remain entirely under your control, and this guardianship petition is dismissed with prejudice. The aftermath was swift and brutal for Derek. Within a week, the district attorney filed charges against him for elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. His employer, a financial planning firm, fired him immediately when the criminal charges became public. The State Bar Association began investigating his unauthorized practice of law. He'd been giving legal advice and preparing documents without a license. Cassandra filed for divorce before Derek's first court appearance. She came to see me on a rainy Thursday evening, 3 months after the hearing. Her pregnancy was showing now, and she looked exhausted, defeated. We sat in my living room, the same room where she'd once played with dolls, while Robert and I planned our first vineyard expansion. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she said. And for the first time in months, she sounded like my daughter instead of Derek's puppet. "I don't know how I let him convince me you were losing your mind. I was so focused on the baby, on providing security for our family, that I let him poison me against you." She explained how Derek had gradually isolated her from me, convincing her that my independent decisions were signs of mental decline. He'd intercepted phone calls, deleted messages, even lied about conversations we'd supposedly had. "He made me believe you were becoming dangerous to yourself," she said through tears. "He showed me forged bank statements suggesting you were being financially irresponsible. He convinced me that taking control was the only way to protect you." The healing between us was slow, careful. Trust, once broken, doesn't repair overnight. But when my granddaughter was born, beautiful little Rose Patricia, named after her great-grandfather Robert and the investigator who'd saved our family, I was in the delivery room, holding Cassandra's hand through every contraction. Derek's criminal trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures, fraudulent documents, recorded admissions of his scheme. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for elder abuse and fraud. plus 5 years of probation and full restitution for his legal fees and my investigative costs. The vineyard is thriving now. Cassandra has moved back to help me manage the business, bringing fresh ideas while respecting the traditions Robert and I established. Rose toddles through the grape rows the same way her mother once did, chasing butterflies and filling her pockets with interesting rocks. We're planning a new tasting room expansion, funded by our most successful harvest in a decade. I keep Derek's forged documents in Robert's safe, not as trophies, but as reminders. Evil often wears familiar faces. It speaks in concerned voices and claims to act from love. It preys on trust, on family bonds, on the assumption that people who share our blood share our values. The letter excluding me from the baby shower sits in that safe too, next to my response. Understood. I understood that my daughter had been manipulated into betrayal. I understood that my son in law was willing to destroy a family for money. But most importantly, I understood that I wasn't as helpless as they assumed. Experience isn't the same as weakness. Gray hair isn't the same as a failed mind. And 64 years of life teaches you that when people show you who they really are, you should believe them. If someone is trying to isolate you from family, question your competence, or pressure you into major financial decisions, trust your instincts. Document everything. Seek legal advice from professionals who work for you, not for family members with questionable motives. Don't let anyone convince you that age equals incompetence or that love requires surrendering your independence. Family betrayal cuts deepest because it comes from those we trust most. But healing is possible when the betrayer takes responsibility and works to rebuild trust. Cassandra and I are proof that relationships can survive deception, but only when the truth comes to light and justice is served. Today, Rose calls me Nana, and her favorite place is the vineyard office where I keep a box of toys next to my computer. She's too young to understand that her father tried to steal her inheritance, too innocent to comprehend the adult world of greed and manipulation. But she'll grow up knowing that her Nana fought to protect what belongs to our family, that sometimes love means saying no to those who would harm us, and that strength doesn't diminish with age. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts. I read every comment, and your support helps other families recognize and fight elder abuse. Remember, you're never too old to stand up for yourself, and you're never too experienced to be deceived by those who claim to love you. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself makes you the villain in their story.